Hey everybody! I have on a really special necklace. I'm going to show you what it actually has on the end of it in just a minute. But this is the handout that this lecture goes with. We're talking about American foreign policy at the turn of the century. Okay, so we've been talking about imperialism and how it was during this time period that America sought to expand their influence worldwide. And this is the second to the last installment of that, where we kind of catch you up on all the different places where you're involved around the world and what happened there. And then in class, we're going to be taking these, I'm going to talk country by country about what happened. And then in class, we're going to take them all and make them chronological. Okay? The very fancy necklace I have on the bottom here, it has a little piggy. Isn't it so cute? This was a very special gift we got from the state fair. But my daughter, I'd like to add. Clarify at least. So some would say this is a time period where we acted a little piggishly. Others would say we just acted in our own self-interest. Remember, there's kind of a couple different takes on imperialism during this time period. Oh, I've got to keep the phone this way because you can see in my dirty closet. Oh, terrible. Okay. So let's look here at, we're really only going to be addressing the first question here today, which is, in what countries and in what ways did the United States assert its self-interest in the imperialist era of the late 1880s and early 1900s? And then the next video you watch will be about how the different presidents react to that. Okay? So, we're picking up with Cuba. If you remember, the last time we talked about Cuba, we had started the Spanish-American War and fought it in Cuba, and Cuba had become independent. But really, I told you they became kind of like a puppet of ours, which is called a protectorate. And we passed an amendment called the Platt Amendment to their constitution, which basically says that we can intervene freely in Cuba's affairs and that they cannot go into debt to anyone else. That if they're going to go into debt to anyone, they're going to go into debt to us, but really, ideally, they wouldn't go into debt at all. And then we put a naval base on their country, which is right here at Guantanamo Bay. It's kind of a weird situation because even though Cuba is an enemy of ours today, we still have that naval base there. And we'll be talking more about what happens in the Cuban Revolution in the late 1950s and all that stuff a little bit later. But from 1898 until the late 1950s, we kind of have this control over Cuba, and they are a protector of ours. We have a lot of American investments in Cuba, a lot of casinos, a lot of hotels. It's kind of a vacation hotspot. They're off the coast of Florida, and so, yeah, us and Cuba are going to be pretty close, and there's going to be a string of rather corrupt dictators in Cuba that support our kind of capitalist and investments there in Cuba. All right, then in the Philippines, if you remember, we won them in the Spanish-American War, and much to their horror, we took them over. And they rebelled against us in a 3-year war. It was called the Philippine-American War. Hardly anyone in America seems to know that we fought this war. It cost us about $400 million. It was a really horrible war. There was torture, waterboarding, if you've ever heard of that phrase. There was torture involved, trying to get people to give us intelligence about what was going on there. It was fought in some very difficult terrain, kind of like Vietnam. We did send a future president. We didn't know he was going to be president at the time, but his name was William Howard Taft. He served as the governor of the Philippines. And after World War II, it becomes kind of tacky to have colonies. Hitler kind of ruined it for everyone, the idea that you should control other countries. And so we offered the Philippines their independence in 1946, and they took it. Especially in the 1980s, there was a rebellion in the Philippines led by Corazon Aquino, and the Philippines distanced themselves from us and kicked out their corrupt dictator, Ferdinand Marcos, and his wife Imelda Marcos, who had over 4,000 pairs of shoes. I think that was an example of the extreme wealth that the Marcoses had, and meanwhile their population was very poor. But since then, they've gotten a little closer to us because they're fighting terrorism in the Philippines. They have some Islamic extremists that are an interior threat. So that's the update with the Philippines. Next we have Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is located right here. Here's Cuba. So here's Puerto Rico close by. We won them in the Spanish-American War, and we ruled them in a heavy-handed fashion, kind of treated them as if they were children and needed to have, like, moral regulations about their moral behavior, and those kinds of things were passed. The Foraker Act was passed, and it said that they were not citizens, and we appointed their Senate, and then I think their Senate appointed their lower house, but there wasn't a lot of true participation by the Puerto Rican people in their government for a long period of time. Finally, in 1917, we issued them citizenship. And today, Puerto Rico is still part of the United States. They're a commonwealth, not a state. They do have an election every now and then to vote whether they want to become a state, but they have not ever voted to become a state. They have a pretty good situation there. They don't have to pay federal taxes, but we are sworn to defend them. It's a pretty complicated situation, actually, there in Puerto Rico in terms of the degree to which they receive benefits. But so far, they've decided not to be a state, so I think that speaks quite a bit to the degree to which they like the situation they have now and consider it to be to their advantage. And then China. Okay, this is a map of China, and you can see that it has these different colors in it. What these colors represent, down here you can see, is these different countries that controlled different parts of China during this time period. And these were called spheres of influence. Basically, these foreign governments controlled these different parts of China. And we looked at this and realized that this is kind of how Africa got carved up. Is first these countries came and had spheres of influence, and then they drew borders around those and actually carved Africa up. And you'll notice here there isn't an American piece of the pie here. So not only were they carving up China, but we didn't really have a piece. So they cut out these spheres of influence. We decide that we don't like this. It could threaten our trade. Plus, we don't have a sphere. So we issue something called the Open Door Notes, and we say that we're going to defend China's independence and our trading interests. And so ironically, to some degree, China has remained a unified whole because America pledged to defend her in the early 1900s. So China did not get carved up like Africa, and it remained a unified nation. Also, the Chinese tried to drive out foreigners in their country during the Boxer Rebellion. If you've ever heard of the Opium Wars, the Europeans had brought drug addiction to China, and a lot of Chinese had realized that foreign influence was really pulling apart their culture and was actually harming them more than helping them at some level. So they tried to, at the same time that we tried to defend their independence, they tried to assert their independence through the Boxer Rebellion. So those two forces came together and made it so that China did not get carved up by the European powers that had an influence there. Japan, meanwhile, right off the coast of China, it has been at war. They got in a war with Russia over Korea, so here's Korea right here, and Russia was up here. And so they were fighting over this territory. Remember, Japan is very mountainous and island, and they don't have a lot of resources, so they wanted to control Korea largely to help gain more resources. Against everyone's expectation, because if you remember the kind of racist, social Darwinist social order said back then that anytime kind of white man fought yellow man, white man should win, and they considered Russians to be more white than the Japanese, obviously. But Japan actually wins the upper hand, and both countries asked Teddy Roosevelt to come in and negotiate a treaty, and that treaty is called the Treaty of Portsmouth. Japan actually gets North Korea and Manchuria, a part of China up here, and that kind of is surprising to a lot of people because Japan had been such an isolated country, and a lot of people did not expect them to have this kind of power in this conflict. It also elevates our president to kind of an international leader, not just our national leader, because he didn't really have anything to do. The United States was not directly involved in this, but yet our president was the one who negotiated the resolution, and he did receive a Nobel Peace Prize for this. So, another thing that's interesting is soon after this, Teddy Roosevelt sent our Navy, our entire Navy, around the world on kind of a world tour, just to kind of show off our guns, which is kind of interesting. And it's also interesting the route that they took. I'll show you here. They take time. This is the route of the Great White Fleet. And you can see that they take time to go really everywhere. They come around Australia, but then come all the way up here and back down there. So it really was his intention to show our strength. Roosevelt was a big believer in peace through strength. Speak softly, carry a big stick was his famous phrase. So maybe the timing of this is coincidental. Interesting, to say the least. Here's a picture of one of our ships in the Great White Fleet in 1908. The next place we're involved is in Colombia and Panama. This is a picture of Panama. It's the skinniest point. You know, Mexico's up here and South America's down on this side. So Panama is like the thinnest point of Central and South America. You'll recall that Admiral Mahan had made it a goal of ours to control or build a canal through Central America. And we decided that we wanted it to be built in Panama. But Colombia controlled Panama, and Colombia said, here's Colombia right here. Colombia said, no thanks, we don't really want you to build a canal in the middle of our country, thanks. So we started a rebellion in Panama. We supported some rebels there, and they rebel against Colombia. And then we sign a treaty with them called the Hay-Bunau-Varilla Treaty. And it gave us a 10-mile swath of land all the way through this part of Panama. And we're going to use it to connect some pre-existing waterways here. You can see this large lake, for example. And we're going to build a canal there, largely due to Teddy Roosevelt's insistence that the project get done. It was beset with all kinds of problems and engineering nightmares and illness due to malaria and yellow fever due to mosquitoes and all kinds of problems, but eventually it will be built there in Panama. Now, the modern update for Panama is that in 1976, Jimmy Carter agreed to give the Panama Canal Zone back to the Panamanians. And so in 1997, they got it back, and they've been controlling it ever since. They're expanding it now so that even aircraft carriers can fit through it. The current size of the canal did not accommodate our largest ships and aircraft carriers, so they're expanding it now, almost doubling it in width, and it costs about $30,000 for each ship to get through the Panama Canal, so it's quite a moneymaker. And also, the Panamanians have promised to always let us use the canal. That was part of the treaty that gave it to them. So now the Panama Canal is controlled by the Panamanians, being expanded, and we are guaranteed access to it. And that was due to Jimmy Carter in 1976. So here's a example of Teddy Roosevelt being seen here, kind of big guns. We'll look at some other examples of cartoons like this in class. Same here, it shows Teddy Roosevelt in kind of a heroic posture, digging himself the Panama Canal. And then this is a visual of just kind of shows the scale of the project in that time period. The next place where we are active is in Mexico, right to the south of our border. There's a rebellion there against the dictator Francisco Madero, and there were kind of three men who were involved in that that rebellion. One named Zapata, one named Carranza, and one named Pancho Villa. Well, we recognized one of those three men as the leader of Mexico, and that made one of the three, kind of like the Three Musketeers, one of the other three really upset. His name was Pancho Villa. So Pancho Villa says that we shouldn't have recognized Carranza, that Carranza isn't the true leader of Mexico. And so they contest his rule, and in protest, to show how upset they are with us, they take 15 Americans off a construction project and kill them. This led to us doing an all-out manhunt to try and find Pancho Villa. It was led by John J. Pershing, a general who's going to be our commander in World War I. We never do find Carranza. But we never find Pancho Villa. But the Mexicans become increasingly annoyed at us kind of marching our military, terrorizing the civilian population in Mexico, and they kind of feel like we've kind of overstepped our boundaries and we've overworn our welcome. And so the Mexicans are kind of annoyed and insulted by our presence in their country. And that might be why later in World War I, when the Germans proposed to the Mexicans that that they ally with Germany against us, it was why that was deemed as like even a possibility. Here's what Pancho Villa looked like. He eventually did die, but not at our hands. He was in intergang violence. And that's it. Okay, we'll be looking next at how each of the presidents during imperialism had kind of their own foreign policy platform, and so that's what we'll be talking about next. So, thanks for your attention. See you in class.